Hello and welcome to this week's Geography at the Garibaldi School. Hope you're all well and you've been working hard. I'd like to start this week with providing you a bit of verbal feedback on last week's learning. Last week we looked at how economic changes in the UK had an impact of differing natures in rural areas, and you looked at two rural areas, one being Cambridgeshire and one being the Outer Hebrides. And the 6-mark exam question I'd like you to self-assess was contrast, which means to compare, the economic challenges associated with rural areas of population growth and decline. Your structure should really be 3 mini paragraphs here. In each of those mini paragraphs you should talk about Cambridgeshire versus the Outer Hebrides and what was different in terms of economic challenges. So in terms of Cambridgeshire, they've got more young people moving in, higher GDP, higher rates of employment, but the challenges there involve things like the prices of houses are going up, the pressure on the Greenbelt land and how people are going to afford these houses, pressure on people that already live there because services become more expensive. The challenges in the Outer Hebrides were more to do with people leaving, young people leaving. You've got an ageing population, no taxes being paid, no local investment. So whereas Cambridge has the positive multiplier effect, the Outer Hebrides has the negative multiplier effect. And this mark scheme is quite general, but I'd like you to think about really what did you do? Did you compare two regions as the first point? Did you give contrasting points? Did you support it with data? I'd like you to think about what mark you got and give yourself some feedback. Once you've done that, always make the improvement as well. Pause the video, come back to me when you've done it. Welcome back, and we'll go on to this week's learning. It's another piece of contrasting work, so we're going to look at what are the differences in economic activity of two contrasting regions. So we're going to know the differences in economic activity of two parts of England, the northeast versus the southeast. Understand the reasons for these, and you're going to produce a really nice annotated map as a source of information. What I'd like all of you to do by the end of this is to have that annotated map that shows the difference between north and south and some of the reasons why these differences are there. We often talk in the UK about something called the north-south divide, the north being less wealthy than the south. And that's highlighted in the image with the coppers versus £50 notes. Take a minute though and pause the video. Can you think of a reason why the north might be seen as less wealthy than the south? Okay, welcome back. Hopefully some of you got to the point where you start to think about deindustrialization and the type of industry. The north was once heavily industrial, but these manufacturing industries, shipbuilding, mining, cotton manufacturing, clothing manufacturing, they've all closed due to deindustrialization. And actually, we know what that process is. If this word is new to you, though, go back a couple of lessons and refresh your memory. The south, though, has always been a bit more based around tertiary and quaternary industries, less focus on manufacturing. Therefore, it's always had a more diverse and possibly wealthier set of jobs. It's also benefited from the fact that London's there, the capital city, and the capital city always attracts inward investment. And this is shown by looking at this image. You'll see the most successful towns lie in the south and the least successful lie in the north, but also we've got evidence. The evidence being things like life expectancy, 4 years difference between Liverpool and Cambridge. The amount of money spent on people in London compared to where we live in the East Midlands is approximately £2,500 more. So we can see that there is this gap between the north and the south. Your first task then is just to think about this and then compare the industrial structure between the northeast and the southeast of England. Where do most of the jobs come from? What does this tell you? Again, remember, compare. What's the similarities and differences? Pause the video. 3 marks, should take you about 3 minutes maximum. and welcome back. Hopefully you've highlighted the fact that in the northeast there's a significant amount of the workforce that work in public services compared to the southeast. In the southeast there's less secondary than there is in the northeast, but things like scientific and finance and business are greater in the south than they are in the north. So your task now is to be able to explain the reasons for these regional differences between the south, represented there by the clock tower with Big Ben, and the north there with the Angel of the North. In your booklet you've got a map of the UK, and you might need to add some text boxes around this as you complete the work. But what I want you to do is annotate the north and the south to show what the differences are and the reasons for it. And you'll need to use this information to do so. These information sheets will also be uploaded as a Word document so that you can have access to these while you work. Read through all the information and pick out 3 or 4 really important bits as a minimum, 5 or 6 as a maximum, that you could use to highlight the difference between the north and the south. Use the data from 2010, but also the reasons for it. Remember as well, this is a case study, so you want some specific examples. I would say things like talking about the Nissan car factory, which has been an important part of the recovery of the area of the northeast, but now think about what's happening to that. A little bit of wider research there. What's happening to that Nissan car factory? Pause the video here. When you've completed it, come back. And welcome back. Hopefully you've got a really nicely annotated map. You might have highlighted the statements that are for the north in blue and the statements in the south in red, so it's really, really clear. And it's a really great revision resource. Now you just need to make some notes about these potential solutions. So, how can we narrow the gap between the richest part of the UK and the poorest part? One idea is to devolve more powers. Devolving more powers means that Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have their own governments, and it means they can use their money on schemes they think will benefit their community. Basically, if they think they need regeneration, they can spend it on regeneration. No one tells them how to spend some of their money. This means that they can invest in what they think is most important to narrow that gap between the richest and the poorest regions. The second is by the creating of enterprise zones. Enterprise zones are areas where businesses are encouraged to set up due to things like reduced taxes or less planning rules or lower rents or even being given money to set up in a certain area. This attracts businesses maybe like Nissan to Sunderland when they replace shipbuilding. It's about offering companies an incentive to invest in an area, to provide jobs and keep the economy going after deindustrialization. The third is the Northern Powerhouse. The Northern Powerhouse is the government's plan to reduce inequalities by attracting investment to the north cities like Manchester, Leeds and Liverpool, big cosmopolitan areas, and attract businesses there, along with improving transport links between northern cities, such as things like HS2. Hopefully, if you attract more investment into these cities, the economy will grow, more companies will invest, that positive multiplier effect again, and hopefully this will help to narrow the gap. We will look at some of these ideas in the next couple of lessons to see how successful they've been. So, what you should now know is the contrasting differences between two parts of the UK, North East England, South East England. You should know the reasons for it, you should have some evidence, you should have some examples, and you should roughly know some very basic ways in which we're trying to narrow that gap. At this point, I'll see you next time.